accompanied by OMB Director Alice Rivlin, National Economic Advisor Laura Tyson, Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Joseph Stiglitz, and Deputy Treasury Secretary Larry Summers.
I need a lot of help today. Please be seated. Good afternoon. Today I am presenting to Congress and the American people my budget for fiscal year 1997. This detailed budget plan invests in our people and balances the budget in 7 years. The budget continues the economic strategy that I put in place when I took office as president. 3 years ago, our economy was drifting and our deficit was exploding. In the 12 years before I became president, the deficit had skyrocketed and the national debt had quadrupled. I was determined that our nation must change course and once again provide growth and opportunity for the American people. So we cut the deficit, we invested in education and training, we opened foreign markets to our goods and services through tough trade agreement, we shrank and reformed our government so that it now has the smallest workforce in 30 years, but is still capable of performing essential functions necessary to the well-being and the growth of the American people. The American economy has turned around. It is now poised for sustained growth. Thanks to the ingenuity and hard work of the American people, our nation has created 8.4 million jobs. We have the lowest combined rate of unemployment, inflation, and home mortgage rates in 27 years. Exports are up dramatically to an all-time high. Key industries from autos to semiconductors once again lead the world. And just yesterday, the World Economic Forum said that for the third year in a row, the American economy was the world's most productive. In addition to that, it's worth noting that in the last couple of years, wages have started rising for the first time in a decade. And as compared with 4 years ago, when only 20% of the new jobs paid above average wages, in 1995, over 55% of the new jobs paid above average wages. But there is more to do. We must press on. The most important thing we can do to keep our economy growing is to finish the job of balancing the budget in a way that reflects our values. In 1992, I pledged to cut the deficit in half and to continue cutting it after that. We are cutting the deficit in half. I'm proud to say that my 1997 budget is the first budget presented by a president of either party in nearly 2 decades to come to balance using the numbers of both Congress and the executive branch. It cuts unnecessary spending in hundreds of government programs. It reforms welfare, putting in place a system that ends welfare as we know it and moves more people from welfare to work. It honors our values by protecting Medicare and Medicaid and investing in our future through education and the environment. It closes corporate loopholes and cuts taxes for working families and small businesses. Most important, this is the second year of the plan I presented to the American people to balance the budget in 7 years. This budget underscores my personal determination. We will balance the budget. The best way for that to happen is for Congress and I to work together. In the coming weeks, we must seize the opportunity we now have to give the American people a moment of real bipartisan achievement. Over the last several months, I have worked closely with the bipartisan congressional leadership. We have spent hours and hours together in serious and productive discussions. The congressional leaders and I have identified $700 billion in savings common to both our plans. That is more than enough to balance the budget in 7 years and to provide a tax cut. I am ready to work with the leaders of Congress to finish the job. Toward that end, I have invited the bipartisan congressional leadership to meet with me tomorrow at the White House. I will urge them to address our pressing national concerns: balancing the budget, welfare reform, the Kennedy-Kassebaum health care bill, the anti-terrorism legislation. And we'll also discuss the prospects for progress on all these areas in the weeks ahead. We have to meet our common obligation to act on our urgent national priorities. We should enact a balanced budget, and we should do it now. Not after the November election, not after the political season, not later, but now. The American people deserve nothing less. It is the right thing to do. Now I'd like to call on the Vice President to discuss some of the priorities in the budget that we are pursuing consistent with our strategy, and then others will come forward to brief you on other aspects of the budget. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to briefly amplify a few of the points President Clinton just made. I would like to begin by complimenting OMB Director Alice Rivlin and her whole team on the outstanding job that you have before you, and also Laura Tyson, Chair of the National Economic Council, Joe Stiglitz, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and Deputy Secretary of Treasury Larry Summers, who will also participate in the briefing for himself and representing Secretary Rubin. It is said that journalists write the first draft of history. If that is indeed the case, what you're witnessing today is quite historic. For the first time in a generation, a President of the United States is submitting to Congress a plan that brings the federal budget into balance by any and every measure. This historic budget required the President to make some very difficult choices, but after a lot of hard work, he and his team have managed to balance the budget without unbalancing our values. This plan recognizes that government cannot do everything, but that it must do some things. I'd like to focus for just a moment on four matters that I believe are particularly important and integral to the future of our country: the environment, technology, education, and a reinvented federal government. Americans have said loudly and clearly that they expect their government to protect our quality of life, from the air we breathe to the water we drink to the food we consume. Until recently, there hasn't been much disagreement about the necessity of government performing this duty. In fact, the greatest strides in environmental protection historically have been made by a Republican president working with a Democratic Congress, and every one of the major environmental statutes received broad bipartisan support when it was enacted. A budget must honor this bipartisan commitment to our natural world and preserve our environment to protect our children's health. The President's budget does that. The budget that we released today increases by 23% the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to do things like cut pollution and enforce the environmental laws. Americans also understand that in a global economy, the only way to maintain America's competitive edge is to lead the world in innovation and new technologies. Investments in science and technology mean better jobs, higher wages, and a growing economy, not to mention new cures for diseases and new products that enrich our lives. A budget, therefore, must honor our obligation to push back scientific frontiers and crash through technological barriers. The President's budget does. It continues our investments in the Advanced Technology Program, manufacturing extension, and the National Information Infrastructure. Americans also want, perhaps more than anything else, a good future for their children. And in an era when what you earn does depend on what you learn, that means, above all, education. Every one of our citizens must have the opportunity to learn. Head Start and good schools when they're young, college loans when they get older, and job training throughout their working lives. A budget must honor our country's defining belief that education is the route to a prosperous and humane society. The President's budget does. It includes a 20% increase in major education and training programs and a commitment to extend Head Start to 1 million more preschoolers by the year 2002. Finally, Americans know that yesterday's government cannot meet tomorrow's challenges. In many areas of our federal government, we must dramatically change how we do what we do. A budget, therefore, must honor our commitment to build a government that works better and costs less. And once again, the President's budget does. It furthers the progress we've already made by establishing world-class customer service, forging stronger relationships with local communities, and creating performance-based organizations that allow government service providers, for example, like the Patent Office, to do business like a business. This president is balancing the budget without unbalancing our values. He's making history, and all of us who have worked with him to produce this budget are proud to be a part of the process. Thank you.
Take over as moderator here. Thank you very much. We are. I'm Laura Tyson, and I've been given the task of coordinating this event today as I coordinate many aspects of economic policy. I want to move quickly through our distinguished lineup of the members of the economic team, and I will start with Alice Rivlin, the director of OMB, who will give us an overview of the budget.
Thank you, Laura. 3 words describe this budget: balance, reform, investment. With respect to balance, the Clinton administration has a strong record on deficit reduction already. The deficit, as you all remember, was $290 billion in 1992, the year before we came on board. It was down in the last fiscal year to $164 billion, 1995. Our estimate for this year, 1996, is $146 billion. That's a pretty good estimate because the year is half over, even though the final numbers have not been put together by the Congress. Our budget estimate for 1996 assumes that we are successful in restoring the $8 billion that Congress wants to cut in education, the environment, and technology. This budget lays out a plan for finishing the job, balancing the budget by 2002. We believe that our plan would reach balance in 2002 using the economic and other assumptions of the Congressional Budget Office. But we can't be absolutely sure of that, so we have put in an insurance policy. If the Congressional Budget Office revises its economic outlook and its estimates in such a way that our budget does not reach balance in 2002, we propose additional discretionary spending, lowering of the discretionary caps, sufficient to close the gap, whatever it is. Our budget will reach balance in 2002, even if the Congressional Budget Office changes the estimates. Now, the administration, as Joe Stiglitz will tell you in a minute, is slightly more optimistic about the economic outlook than the Congressional Budget Office. And we're not shy about saying so, because in the last 3 years, the economy has performed better and the deficit has come down faster than the CBO thought and even than we thought. Under administration economic assumptions, this budget would actually balance in 2001 and run a considerable surplus in 2002. If that surplus, or the fiscal dividend as we call it, materializes, we propose to use it to extend the tax cuts that are proposed in this budget and to reduce the cuts in discretionary spending. This budget does not just balance, however. It does it in the right way by reforming entitlement programs and investing in the future. About half of the spending savings in this budget are in mandatory or entitlement programs. We don't gut Medicare or Medicaid or welfare. We propose changes that will make those programs work better and cost less. For Medicare, our budget saves $124 billion over 7 years while strengthening the program. It extends the solvency of the hospital trust fund for another 10 years. It gives seniors more choices among private health plans, and it mounts a vigorous attack on fraud and abuse in Medicare. It reduces the rate of growth of provider payments, but it holds the Part B premium at 25% of the cost. For Medicaid, our program gives the states much more flexibility. They could move the Medicaid population into managed care without a waiver. The program limits per capita spending, but it preserves the guarantee that ensures that money continues to flow to the states and to the most needy people. Welfare reform, our program makes the assistance time-limited and conditional on work, but it protects children and it provides more money for child care. The Vice President has talked about investing in the future. Our overriding objective here is to raise the living standards of average Americans. The budget continues the emphasis on education, on training, on technology, and on the environment. It continues to expand Head Start, 800,000 Head Start opportunities this year, on a track to a million by 2002. It increases the help for dislocated workers who have been buffeted by changes in the economy. The budget would assist twice as many workers as were helped in 1993. The Vice President has talked about the environment. I just want to mention a singularly important program, the program to restore Florida's Everglades, a major project to protect a natural resource and a national treasure. We reform and we invest on both sides of the budget, spending and taxing. Larry will talk about the taxes. But the main point is the one that the President made so clearly. The President has a plan to balance the budget. He wants to work with the congressional leadership to do it, and he wants to do it now. Let's wait until everybody's had a chance, and then we'll take all the questions we can.
These are meant to be informative overviews of facts, not speeches. I now will do a brief overview of revenue. Larry, numbers? No, I was. Okay.
I will try to be brief. The economic forecast contained in this budget document is identical to the forecast in the February budget. Overall, we believe that we will continue to see non-inflationary growth with low unemployment. We project real GDP to grow at 2.2% to 2.3% over the forecast period, a growth rate which is similar to projections from the CBO and private forecasters. We expect that inflation will remain low and stable, with the CPI increasing by 3.1% in 1996 and then edging down to 2.8% by 1998. This decline is largely due to technical corrections in the way the CPI is calculated. We project the unemployment rate will remain low at about 5.7% throughout the entire forecast period. And we expect interest rates to drop slightly. Short rates are expected to fall, leveling off at 4%, and the 10-year rate will fall, leveling off at 5% in 1998. As I have said, these projections are the same as those included in the February budget. Given that we now have several months of data under our belts, we are more confident that our projections for 1996 are on target. In January of this year, we saw numbers that were somewhat weak. But since early February, the numbers have been particularly strong. The employment report shows 705,000 jobs created. Auto sales were brisk, durable goods orders increased, and industrial production was up. These reports suggest that our projections made 2 months ago remain on track. We believe that the outlook for our economy in 1996 is good. We expect continued steady growth with solid job creation and low inflation. Let me conclude by saying for the past 3 years, the economic projections of this administration have consistently been on target. Comparisons of our earlier projections with the economy's actual performance show only small differences. We believe that the economic assumptions presented in this budget are similarly sound and realistic. Now let me turn to Deputy Secretary Summers, who will talk about the tax portion of this budget.
I want to describe the tax provisions in the President's budget. Broadly, the tax provisions demonstrate that it is possible to balance the budget while cutting taxes for working families and promoting economic growth. The President's tax provisions fall in three broad areas. First, the budget shows that we can provide real tax cuts for working families to promote economic security. It includes a $500 tax credit for every child under 13 in a working family. Second, for these same families, it provides a $10,000 tax deduction to help pay for the college education for children or training expenses for themselves. Also, expands IRAs with new flexibility to permit their use when people become unemployed, want to educate their children, or buy a new home, or face catastrophic medical expenses. The budget also includes, for working Americans, new provisions to expand the deductibility of health insurance for the self-employed and to make it possible for small businesses to offer, on much easier ways than in the past, pension plans, provision that potentially affects millions of Americans. Second, the President's budget contains strategic incentives to drive the economy forward on a number of crucial dimensions. Second round of empowerment zones and enterprise communities, along with new tax incentives to encourage companies to clean up abandoned industrial sites, known as brownfields, in economically distressed rural and urban areas. This provision is expected to leverage some $10 billion in investment, helping to revitalize communities. The budget also contains estate tax relief targeted to the cash flow problems that arise at the difficult time when the owner of a family business dies, and an increase in the amount of investment that small businesses can expense. Third, the budget contains over 50 provisions to close tax loopholes, cut corporate subsidies, and improve compliance. These measures discourage transactions that are motivated not by making the economy better, but instead just for saving on taxes. They help to expand tax fairness for all Americans. For example, the budget contains reforms to close loopholes that benefit Americans who renounce their citizenship in order to avoid taxes, and it reforms the taxation of income from foreign trusts. It also prevents corporations from benefiting from certain kinds of what are called tax arbitrage activities, or tax or financial products that are designed to facilitate tax avoidance. There are also curbs on manipulation of accounting rules. To conclude, we balance the budget in 7 years. We do so in a way that, as the Vice President says, does not unbalance the economy. The process, we drive the economy forward, and most important, we provide important relief to working American families. There are tax simplification proposals in several areas, most notably in the pension area, where the rules affecting small businesses will be changed to make it much easier for small businesses to offer 401k type provisions. The measures that are taken to close certain loopholes will, in the process, avoid the large amounts of complexity that goes into people trying to find their way into those tax-favored those kinds of tax-favored transactions.
No capital gains tax cuts.
The budget does not contain capital gains tax cuts.
Is the administration flexible on that?
Administration has presented its budget, which describes what we see as the right way forward to drive the economy forward. Obviously, we're prepared. Obviously, there are going to be discussions with congressional leaders, but this is the way we regard as right to help the economy go forward.
I don't think so. I think we need legislation to do that, because the current law requires the waiver process. We've granted a lot of waivers, but we would like to be able to give the governors flexibility so they don't have to go through this complicated waiver process.
There are two provisions affecting capital gains contained in the president's budget. One goes against so-called short against the box transactions. These are transactions carried out by highly sophisticated, large investors, which permit them, in effect, to realize the money from stocks that they hold without paying the capital gains tax. And we basically restrict those transactions. We have also shifted we also call for what is called average cost basis in capital gains. This will prevent manipulation by sophisticated investors, while at the same time protecting less experienced investors by applying the same rule for determining what the basis that an individual has when they sell an asset is to all classes of investors, using the rule that's now applied to mutual funds. These are technical changes that correct evasions and which prevent the unwary from falling into a trap that's possible under current law. We do not address in the budget the broader capital gains, the broader structure of capital gains questions.
I'd like to ask Dr. Rivlin, you have lots and lots of details in this budget about the sweetener you're offering, but I don't see much specificity about the pain in terms of reaching balance in 2002. Can you give us some specific examples of who would feel the sting of this budget and when?
Well, there are very large cuts in this budget, and they are of all sorts. We cut out of discretionary spending over the whole period $297, almost $300 billion. That means that almost all programs will be cut. We have made clear in the budget that we think there are certain high priority programs, which include education and the environment and some of the things we talk most about, which should not be cut, and indeed in some cases should be increased. But everything else will be cut, and the fraction of programs that actually go down is quite high. In terms of budget accounts, even in 1997, there are 230 budget accounts that go down.
The more prominent ones that will be cut?
Well, Medicare is a good example of a program that will be cut. Who will feel the pain? Not beneficiaries. We have held the premiums at 25% of the cost, and we have not passed on more of the cost to beneficiaries. Who's left? Providers, clearly. Hospitals and doctors and other providers will not get as much money from Medicare as they otherwise would have.
Name some programs you've actually proposed to terminate?
We have some terminations, but we have terminated so many programs already that there were not a lot of programs left to terminate, so that mostly what you see in this budget is reductions, but not terminations.
Senator Dole once again said today that he would call for several departments to be eliminated. What's your reaction? I mean, they say that there needs to be more cutting, and that's the one way is to eliminate several cabinet departments.
We don't think that's an effective way to cut the budget. It's a kind of trophy hunting that you can say, well, I eliminated the X department. But those departments have major missions that the American public wants carried out. So eliminating a department means moving the programs to other departments. And we examined this very carefully over a year ago and came to the conclusion that this was not an effective way to reduce the budget. We should make the departments work better and eliminate